Okay, hi boys and girls, Rio Grande, third graders. You're going to need your Envision's hardback book today. So we're going to take a look at using your newfound rounding skills to estimate sums. So if you go to page 46 and 47 in your book, it's going to look like this. And we're going to talk about how to use rounding to estimate our sums. So you may also want your multiples of 10 chart if you don't feel like you are fluent or proficient yet in using your just your steps to decide whether you're rounding up or down. This might be also something that you use, or your number line. Some of you may have already created a number line. If you've created your number line, you may also use that as well. So just a couple of tools that you can use to help you with this assignment. So I'm going to start by talking about the importance of rounding. And when we started rounding, we were using our idea of rounding so that we could do some adding and subtracting with some of our, so we could use rounding just to make sure that we have a good estimated rounded guess. So when we round numbers, we always round the add-ins, and those are the numbers that we're adding. So for number 1, on page 47, we have 28, and we have 46. And you'll notice in the directions, it asks us to round to the nearest 10 to estimate. So we want to know if something's reasonable when we get the final sum. So if I take 28 and I round it to the closest 10, well, my 2 tells me this is going to be between 20 and 30. So if I look at the 8, 25 again is right in the middle of 20 and 30, but 28 is past 25, so this is past the 5 in the ones place. So we know that we are going to be closer to 30. Okay, when we take 46, 46 is between 40 and the next 10, which is 50. And remember, we always look at the ones place. It's past 45. So if it's past 5 in our ones place, we know we are going to round up to the next 10, which is 50. Now, if we add our 30 and our 50, we are going to get 80 as our rounded sum. So now we can take 28 and add it together and see if that sum is about or close to that rounded amount. So 28, 20 and 40 is 60, and 8 and 6 is 14. And when we add the 60 and the 10, that's 70, and 4 more is 74. So when we look at the estimate, and this little symbol means about or approximately, it looks like a little wavy equal symbol. This is our about symbol or our estimate symbol. So 74 is about 80. So that's number 1. So looking at number 2, again, we're rounding to the closest 10. So we're going to first, you're going to skip a line after you've done number 1. Skip a line, go to number 2. We're going to do some of these together, of course. Number 2, we have our equation, which is 75 plus 17. And actually, this is an expression because it doesn't have an equal sign because we're not looking for the exact sum here. So we're going to put our little estimate symbol, which is about. And we're going to use our estimation of rounding. So 70 is going to be, 75 is going to be between 70 and 80. Our ones digit tells us that 75 is right in the middle of 70 and 80. So if it's right in the middle, our rule is Round up, right, set, round up to 80. Right in the middle, the rule is round up. 17, between 10 and our next 10 is 20. Remember, 15 will be in between 10 and 20. So again, 17, looking at the ones place, greater than 5, tells us to round up to 20. When we add 80 and 20, we add 2 more 10s to 80. So 1 more 10 to 80 would be 90, and another 10 would be 100, because what happens when we get 10 tens? That makes 100. So we have 8 tens and 2 tens, and now we have 10 tens, which is making our 100. Now let's take a look at whether when we add these together to find the exact sum, is that going to be close to our estimate, our rounded amount. So we're going to take 75, and we're going to add 70 and 10 more, which is 80, and adding 5 and 7. So 5 and 5 is 10. So if we can use 5 plus 5, we could really say 2 more to make 7 would be 12. If I could break this up as 2 and 5. And 5 and 5 makes 10, plus 2 more is 12. Now, if I add the 80 plus 10, 80 and 10 is 90. 90 and 2 more, 92. So, if you notice, your estimate is close to about 100. But notice, if I were going to round this number to the closest 10, I wouldn't round it to 100. It would actually round to 90. So we want to round our add-ins instead of rounding the sum. So now, if this said 52, then we would probably say then it's not a good estimate, which means we either didn't estimate correctly or we didn't add correctly. These should be fairly close to one another. So if they are not within approximation together, then you need to go back and recheck. So let's look at number 3. And in your directions for number 3, it says round to the nearest 100 to estimate. So remember, the closer the place value is to your exact amount, the more accurate that estimate's going to be. So now that we're rounding to the closest 100, the estimate is going to be further away from the exact amount than it would be if we were rounding to the closest 10. So keep that in mind whenever you're rounding to the closest 100. So looking at number 3, we're rounding to the closest 100, and we have number 3 is the expression of 114, and we're adding to that 58 and 58 more. So we put our estimation symbol here. It's about. So if we look at 114, our 100th place tells us it's going to be between 100 and 200. We look at the tens place, and remember, 50 is right in the middle of 100 and 200. So if 14 is going to be less than 50, that tells us we're going to round to the lower 100, and so we would round to 100. If our tens place was past the 50, then that would tell us we would round up. Now, 58 doesn't have a 100th place, so that tells us that we would either round to 0 or 100. Well, how can we round to 0? Really, unless it was like 2, the number 2, 3, or somewhere in that range, we wouldn't round to a 0, but we're definitely past 50 here. So we would round to the closest 100 would be 100, because 58 falls between 0 and 100. So it's going to round to 100, which tells us if we add 100 and 100, it's going to be approximately or about 200. if I look here, I don't have a hundredths place here, so I can just go ahead and add 110 plus 50. And if I add 110 plus 50, that should give me 160. And then I could just add my ones here. And 4 and 8. 8 and 2 is 10, and 2 more is 12. So if I take 160 plus 10, that's 170. 170 and 2 more, using our mental math strategy, it's going to be 172. So again, remember, it's not going to be as close because we're not rounding to the nearest 10, we're rounding to the nearest 100, but it's still within a good range. Now, if this just said 72, then we would need to revisit our thinking. Or if this said 1,720, then we would say, oh, 1,000 is not close to 200. So just keep in mind that it should be within a certain amount whenever you're estimating to the nearest 100. Number 4. Number 4 is 198. And if you see 198 right now, some of you are probably already thinking, oh, wow, that's pretty close to the next 100 in that range. So 198 is going to be between 100 and the next 100, which would be 200, right? And 98 is pretty close to that next 100 because it's past 50. It's definitely past 50. So it's going to round to 200. We have 400 or the next 100, which would be 500. We again look at our tens place. We know 26 isn't past 50. So since it's not past 50, we're going to round to the lower 100, which is 400. So now that I've rounded those two numbers to the closest hundredth, I can add my 200s and my 400s, and 400s and 200s are going to give me 600s. So now I can go ahead and add these to see if it's going to be approximately the same amount. So 100 and 400 is 500. 90 and 2 more 10s. What comes after 90? 100. The next 10 would be 110. And then 8 and 6 is going to be 14. So 500 plus 100 is 600. Plus 10 and 10 is 20. And then we have the 4 more, which is going to give us the 624. So we can say that approximately 624 is close to 600. So we've done a couple of problems with rounding to the closest 10. We've done a couple of problems rounding to the closest 100. In this lesson, it also talks about using compatible numbers. Now, at this point in time, I think I would like to just kind of stick with rounding as our way of estimating. Compatible numbers are numbers that usually people find very easy to add very quickly. So 25s and 25 would be 50. People are accustomed to adding quarters together, so they know that 75 and 25 would make 100. Those are just that's just one example of a compatible number. But a compatible number is just an easy, user-friendly number that you would use to make the adding a little easier in mentally. So right now, I think I'm going to skip 5 and 6. But for 5 and 6, if you continue with 5 and 6, I would continue using rounding to the nearest 100 for those. So if I were to round to the closest 100, and I'm just going to quickly do number 6 with you. Number 6 would be 654 and 253. And don't think that compatible numbers aren't important. It's just for right now, we're just wrapping our minds around the idea of rounding, and rounding is a very new concept for third graders. So I want to stick with some similarity to what they're already doing. And so rounding happens to be something that we're working on right now, so I want to stick with that. So let's take 654, round it to the closest hundred. We're looking at the hundreds place because we're rounding to the closest hundred. 600 or 700. Again, past 50, so we know that this is going to round to 700. 200 is in our hundredth place. Again, we're looking at our tens place to make a decision. Is it past 250? If it's past 250, we would round to the next 100, and the next 100 after 200 is 300. Now, if we add our 700 and our 300, we can add 3 more hundreds onto 700. So what happens when we add 3 more hundreds onto 700? Well, 100 would be 800, 200s would be 900, and another 100 would mean we have 10 hundreds. But what that tells us is we're creating that new place value of 1,000. So, writing it with a comma, we're separating that next period of place values, which would be thousands, 10,000s, and 100,000s. But for now, we're just going to work within 1,000. So let's take a look at, is this going to be a good approximation? Is it reasonable? Well, 600 and 200 is 800. 50 and 50 makes another 100. And 4 and 3 makes 7. Together, this is going to be 800 and 100 is 900, plus 7 is 907. Notice we were able to regroup this 50 and 50 to make a new 100. So there are no 10s here. So 907 and 1,000 is a close estimate. Again, remember, if you're rounding to the nearest 100, this is going to be further away. Now, if we were going to round this to the nearest 10, our estimate would be much closer to the exact answer. So if I were to do that real quickly, 650 would be my rounded to the closest 10, and 250 would be my closest 10 there, and this would be 800 plus 100, which would be 900. And actually, that did not work out the way that I had planned it would work out. Oh, yeah, yes it did. So here's my estimate. My estimate here is much closer. I lost track of what I was doing it. My estimate, this is my estimate. This estimate is much closer to my exact answer. So rounding to the closest 10 gave me a much closer estimate than rounding to the closest 100. So if you have any other questions, I'll be live and online at 1:30 today with the online group. But if you have any other questions, you can always email me or in Schoology. But remember, your assignment is to do even numbers. And so remember, you also have a page 48, and that page 48 is a continuation. So you're only going to do even numbers for me on those particular pages. So I hope that you were able to glean some more work on learning how to estimate. We're going to continue estimating after that with sums, and then we're going to do differences. So hopefully this is going to be good information for you for differences as well. Have a great day.